starts now.
First tonight at 6 o'clock, the Missouri Supreme Court rules the state's new congressional map will be in effect for the upcoming election.
At President Trump's urging, Missouri was one of the first states to redistrict in hopes of increasing Republican representation in Washington, D.C.
Our Capitol reporter Hannah Falcon was in that courtroom today and has the latest on the efforts to stop this new map.
Hundreds of angry Missourians marching outside the state's highest court. They're protesting the state's new congressional map, passed during a special legislative session last year, that is likely to send one more Republican to Washington, D.C. by splitting up Kansas City's vote. Their chants reach the courthouse steps as the Missouri Supreme Court makes a ruling Tuesday afternoon, allowing that map to stay in effect. The justices unanimously decided the new congressional map is fair to voters and will be in effect for the August primary election.
The Missouri Constitution says that a law is not frozen until it is, quote, referred to the people, end quote.
About something very different, whether the people of Missouri still have a meaningful and effective referendum right.
Ahead of the ruling, ACLU of Missouri lawyer Tori Schaefer argues the court should have paused the map because a petition was turned in that, if verified, would let the voters of Missouri decide whether to implement the new districts.
If laws can switch on and off like a light switch, regardless if the people use their right to veto, that would mean our right to veto doesn't exist.
Protesters marching behind me are carrying giant numbers that read 305,968. That represents the number of people who signed that petition to overturn this new map.
Some of the local election authorities are still counting signatures.
Those signatures are still being verified. Secretary of State Denny Hoskins says the map cannot be paused until that counting is done, which he guesses will be right before the August primary election.
If we went back to the old maps or to a different map other than the Missouri First map, we'd be in disarray.
The map could still be overturned by Missouri voters in November if the petition is verified, but it would be too late for this year's elections. Reporting in Jefferson City, I'm Hannah Falcon.